Let's get to the second, top 25 matchup. I guess Texas and Alabama by technicality is not a top 25 matchup, but the second game, interesting one in the swamp. How about this? You want to know how quickly fortunes can change? Kentucky, Florida is now a matchup of ranked opponents after Florida began the year unranked. They're now ranked number 12 in the country coming into this one. They are playing the Kentucky Wildcats. Interesting line movement in this game. In the Betfred Sportsbook, Florida opened as a 5.5-point favorite. That number was bet down to about, I want to say 4.5 early in the week. Then it was back up to 5.5. Now, as I record here early on Thursday, it is already at 6. The over-under is at 52.5. From the Florida perspective, listen, we all saw Florida last week. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on them. The only thing that really stood out to me about that first game is a couple things. One, great win against Utah, right? So I'm not going to try to take away anything from Utah. I think we did see that this team does have some deficiencies, even though they won. And I think it's stuff Billy Napier would talk about. Like, I don't think it's criticizing Florida to say that they have some deficiencies, especially along the defensive line, where Utah really just ran the ball right at them throughout that game, especially in the second half. I also do wonder coming into this one, Anthony Richardson's like a stud, right? And so this isn't like a bash Anthony Richardson segment. I do wonder, I just think for Utah, it was really, really, really tough for them to game plan for Anthony Richardson. I know they had tape on him, but he really had not played super meaningful snaps last year, except against that Georgia defense, which was historically great. And so I do wonder with a week's worth of prep, a week's worth of game planning for Anthony Richardson, does Kentucky have an answer for him? Because I'll be honest, right? You go back to the preview last week that I had of Utah, Florida, and I said, I got to see it to believe it with Anthony Richardson. Well, I'll tell you this. I saw it, and I am very much a believer, specifically just the dual threat ability that we all knew that he had. Just an unbelievable game from him last week. 106 yards rushing, almost 10 yards per carry, 3 touchdowns, as well as 165 yards passing. Like I said, though, we saw Florida last week, and so I want to switch gears, and I want to talk about Kentucky, because one thing I always try to do, I try to watch as much as I can. I know realistically you can't watch every snap of every game. It's just not going to happen. But more importantly, I try to go beyond the box score, right? And I think if you do that, if you just looked at the Kentucky final score, 37-13 win over Miami of Ohio, you'd sit there and say, oh, great win for Kentucky. They're incredible. They're picking up right where they left off last year when they won 10 games. I'm not totally sold. First of all, did you see this game was at halftime 13-10 Kentucky. Kentucky had a big third quarter to pull away, but a couple things stand out. Kentucky was just 2 of 8 on third down. Beyond that, and this is where I would be concerned, 26 rushing attempts for 50 yards. You heard me correct. 26 rush attempts, 50 yards rushing for the Kentucky Wildcats, and that is where I would be concerned coming into this game. Again, I don't think the defensive front is a strength of the Florida Gators, but when you rush for 26 carries for 50 yards against a MAC opponent, and I know Miami of Ohio is not terrible, but a MAC opponent, that is not good, and that speaks to my biggest concern about Kentucky coming into this game specifically. They are going to be down a few bodies in the running back room. Chris Rodriguez will not play. Cavassier Smoke will. Ramon Jefferson, a highly touted FCS transfer, will not play in this game either. And so I do worry, is Kentucky going to be able to move the ball on the ground against this Florida front? Not because Florida is elite, and that's not a criticism of Florida, but it's just a fact. But more importantly, because do they have the bodies, and what is up with that offensive line going into this game? Beyond that, what I would say, why I'd be concerned if I'm back in Kentucky. And I don't tell you what to do. Again, spreads at about 6 points now in the Betfred Sportsbook. It was 5.5 on Wednesday, 6 early on Thursday. My other concern is if you go historically, I do think that Mark Stoops, especially on the road, especially in big games, especially against teams with equal talent of his, I do think he gets a little bit conservative. And that's not a knock on Mark Stoops, right? Like, you can say something without it being a criticism. But I went back and looked because I said to myself, and if you go back to the preseason preview show that I did with Kentucky, one thing that I did say was, I think they're a little bit overhyped coming into the year, in part because they beat a bad Florida team thanks to a special teams play in Lexington last year. They beat a bad LSU team where Coach O obviously had been fired. And so I bring it up because you go back to some of those other games, especially on the road. We get so excited about Will Levis, potential first rounder. He eats bananas. He does the mayonnaise thing in his coffee. Like, okay, show me something on the road in a big game. Because here's the deal. And it's not criticism. It's just a fact. You're a first round pick. You're a potential number 1 overall pick as you've been touted. This is a game you go on the road and get the win, especially when you're going up against another first round talent in Anthony Richardson. And so I'll be curious to see it, especially because Mark Stoops has historically played very close to the vest on the road in SEC play against good teams. You go back to last year, statistically, Kentucky was awesome offensively, but they had a lot of big scoring outputs against bad teams, right? You go back to last year, I think it's easy to sit there and say Kentucky had this elite offense. Well, look at some of the teams they did it against. Put up, you go back to last year for Kentucky, they put up last season 35 points against a terrible Missouri team, 42 points against that bad LSU team, 42 points against Tennessee, 56 points against New Mexico State, 52 against Louisville. But if you go to some of those close road games, they also only put up 17 points against Mississippi State on the road and 16 points against South Carolina on the road. And they really actually kind of took the ball out of Will Levis's hands in both of those games. 102 yards passing against South Carolina, 150 yards passing against Mississippi State. Mississippi State, he threw a little bit more because he had to. But I do wonder if Mark Stoops takes the ball out of his hands, and I wonder if he can afford to take the ball out of his hands going into a rough environment in the swamp with his running back room pretty beat up. And so to me, I'll just tell you, my personal thought on this game is that it's close, is that it's low scoring. I'd probably lean Florida outright, Kentucky in the points. I love Florida. I love what Billy Napier did. I don't want to overreact to week 1. I think even Billy Napier would tell you we have a lot of places where we are not at the level that we need to be. And I'm genuinely curious to see if Florida, if we can have that magic in the swamp 2 weeks in a row, or if Kentucky, for the 3rd time in 5 years, can take care of the Florida Gators. My official pick would be the